My mother had me when she was just 21, and my father was never part of the picture. According to her, he wasn't interested in having kids. And since their relationship was still fairly new when she got pregnant, she gave him the choice to walk away. And he did. She told me their breakup had been tough and out of spite. She never pursued any child support. He wouldn't have paid it anyway, and they both seemed content never speaking again. Thankfully, her parents stood by her through everything. With their support, she was able to finish her degree and find a steady job. As I grew up, she dated now and then. When I was around 9, she started seeing a guy named Darren. He was a colleague of hers, and they eventually got married after a few years of dating. Darren and I weren't especially close, but we managed to be civil and share the same roof without any major issues. A few years into their marriage, my mom got pregnant. Everyone was thrilled about the baby, including me. Looking back, maybe I should have seen the shift coming, but I was too caught up in believing my mom would always have my back. She had gone through so much raising me on her own, and I trusted that wouldn't change. But she started growing distant not long after marrying Darren, and though I noticed the change, I kept thinking it was temporary, that we'd reconnect eventually. When she was expecting, I really tried to be supportive. I'd check in, offer help, and stay upbeat. But it seemed like the more present I was, the more irritated she became. Not wanting to add to her stress, I started keeping a low profile around the house. Still, I guess I wasn't invisible enough. About 6 months after she had the twins, she and Darren pulled me aside for a serious talk. They told me they couldn't keep me in the home anymore. Since I had just turned 16, they couldn't technically kick me out without risking legal trouble, but they made it clear they wanted me to go. They framed it as a matter of finances. Raising a family of 5 was too much, they said, and their combined salaries as software developers couldn't stretch far enough. I didn't buy it. We'd always been comfortable. 2 working adults supporting themselves, a teenager, and now 2 babies. It didn't seem impossible. It just sounded like an excuse to make room for their new family, and I honestly didn't want to leave. I cared about them, and I still believed things could be worked out. I offered to pitch in. If money was the issue, I said I could get a part-time job to ease the pressure. But my mom dismissed it. She said they needed to focus their time and energy on the kids, the ones who truly deserve to be here, in her words. Not need to be, but deserve. That wording stuck with me. That's when I realized I wasn't part of their plans anymore. They knew I had enough self-respect not to stick around where I clearly wasn't wanted. So they didn't have to force me out. They just steered me toward the exit. I left that night without even being told where to go. Their approach worked exactly as they'd hoped. Since they never officially told me to leave, it wasn't a formal eviction. But to me, it felt no different. Backed into a corner, I didn't see any other option. I went straight to my grandparents' house that same day. Even though they were disappointed in how my mom had handled everything, my grandparents didn't cut ties with her. They wanted to stay close to the newborns. I understood, but it still stung. At 16, I found a part-time job. I knew I couldn't depend on my grandparents financially. They were in their 70s and dealing with their own health issues. I saw my mom and Darren occasionally when they visited my grandparents with the twins, but they barely acknowledged me. Conversations were stiff and polite, like I was a distant acquaintance rather than their family. When we crossed paths, they honestly looked content without me around. It was hard seeing how much calmer my mom seemed without me in her life. Still, I knew there wasn't anything I could say or do to change it. I stayed with my grandparents through the end of high school. When it came time to leave for college, I had to manage the move myself. My mom was uninvolved, and my grandparents weren't in any condition to help with the logistics. Some close friends stepped in to help me get settled into the dorms. Since my mom and Darren said they were saving for the twins' future, they didn't contribute anything. I had to take out a student loan, and one of my cousins agreed to co-sign, as long as I promised they'd never be held financially responsible. Throughout college, I kept working part-time so I wouldn't fall behind on my payments and to build a bit of stability for myself. After I started school, my mom and I barely spoke. Only my grandparents stayed involved in my life. When I graduated, not even a quick message came from my mother. She didn't say a word, probably to avoid placing any kind of responsibility on my aging grandparents. After finishing school, I found a job and started living on my own. The pay wasn't great at first, but I managed to stay on top of things, covering rent, bills, food, and slowly chipping away at my student debt. I was careful with my money and started saving little by little. You could say I was living on a tight budget, but I made it work. Over time, things improved. It took years of steady effort, but I eventually moved up within the company I joined after graduation. Considering I had little to no help, I'm genuinely proud of how far I've come. Now, at nearly 34, I'm in a stable place financially and professionally. Despite not having spoken to my mother in many years, she somehow found out that I've done well for myself. I currently hold a senior leadership position at the same company where I got my start. Just a few months ago, I was promoted again, something I kept private except for telling a few close people. I shared the news with my uncle, the one who helped me secure my student loan all those years ago, as a way of saying thank you. From what I've heard, he later ran into my mom and Darren at a family event and encouraged her to reach out and congratulate me. I'm sure he meant well, but it didn't lead to anything. She never contacted me, not even a brief message to say she was proud or happy for me. Eventually, though, the news got to her. A few weeks ago, she showed up at my place with Darren, saying she needed to talk. That was the first time I'd seen or heard from her since college. I had cut off all contact after graduation, blocking her on every platform, because I realized waiting around for her to change wasn't going to lead anywhere. Honestly, she never seemed affected by the silence, and I doubt she even noticed I was gone. The only people I stayed in touch with were my grandparents, and even they knew better than to bring up anything about my mother. They respected that boundary. I didn't really keep up with my uncle either, so I had no idea that my mom and Darren had been struggling financially for some time. I only found out when they showed up at my door and explained how bad things had become. As much as I had my doubts, I let them in, mostly because deep down I hoped they were finally reaching out to make things right. But that wasn't the case. They started off by mentioning that my uncle had told them about my recent promotion and how I was now one of the youngest people to hold a leadership role at my company. But instead of congratulating me, they seemed more surprised that I hadn't shared the news with them. That caught me off guard. How could they expect me to keep them updated when we hadn't spoken in nearly 2 decades? I was more shocked that they assumed we still had that kind of relationship. Then came the guilt trip. They said they were hurt that I had cut them off and insisted they'd only been trying to put their children first. According to them, I should have understood that shift in priorities and not taken it personally. They claimed I was old enough back then to support their decisions and that I had chosen to leave, not been pushed. I honestly didn't know what to say. I couldn't understand how they believed I would have been okay with being forced out of my home like that. They started trying to twist the narrative, making it seem like I was the unreasonable one for being upset, and justifying that they had sent me away so they could focus on their own children. That was how they chose to begin what was supposed to be a reunion. Not a word about how I'd felt all these years. No apology. Just a one-sided explanation about how difficult life had been for them. They went on about a business they had started that unfortunately didn't work out, leading to major financial losses. Now, they were scrambling to recover and, as they put it, needed help. That's when it hit me, why they were really there. The twins, now nearing college age, needed funding, and they were hoping I would step in. They didn't dance around it. They said I could make things right by covering the cost of my siblings' education. Before even acknowledging any of the pain they caused, they expressed disappointment that I had never reached out despite doing well for myself. What shocked me most was how they tried to present it as though they were offering me something, some chance to reconnect, by asking me to pay for 2 kids I hadn't spoken to in over 15 years. I shut it down immediately. I told them I wasn't going to do it, and it was out of line for them to think they could manipulate me into taking responsibility for something that had never been mine. I reminded them bluntly that I had to work through college and take on debt because they chose to invest their time and resources in the children they believed were more worthy. They hadn't supported me financially when I needed it most, and I made it clear they had no grounds to expect anything from me now, especially not money. I reminded them that I never argued with their decision to prioritize the twins. I simply stepped away and left them to it. so they had no right to demand a relationship now or try to guilt me into anything. I pointed out that if they were so committed to saving for the twins back then, they should have enough set aside by now to cover their college expenses. That was the whole reason they gave for pushing me out, wasn't it? With nothing more to add, I asked them to leave. I was foolish to think they might have come to apologize or reflect on how they treated me. Instead, they got defensive and started shifting blame. As I stood firm on asking them to go, they claimed I wasn't completely innocent either. They accused me of being too intense, too attached, and overly emotional during our time living together. I was shocked. That was their complaint? I had been a teenager trying to stay connected with a family that was pulling away from me, not acting out or causing harm. Then they said something that really caught me off guard. They accused me of being just like them, of turning my back on family when it mattered most. They brought up the years my mom raised me on her own, as if that canceled out everything that followed. According to them, this was my chance to repay her, and I was being selfish and ungrateful instead. It felt ridiculous to me. I had been a child during those years, and now they were trying to use that history to justify expecting something I never agreed to give. Even if I had wanted to rely on them back then, that option was never on the table. It's not like they were offering support. They pushed me out, plain and simple, convinced that I was old enough to manage on my own, and from that point forward, they acted like I didn't exist. Even now, I still find it hard to believe they had the nerve to show up and ask for help, as if I owed them something after all that. Things got heated quickly. The conversation turned ugly, and I ended up warning them that if they didn't leave my property, I'd have to involve the police. Right before they walked out, my mom started listing off all the things she'd done for me when I was a child, insisting it was all out of love and a desire to be a good parent. But in the same breath, she called me ungrateful, saying that the one time she needed me to be understanding and put others before myself, I chose not to. According to her, I was now painting her as the bad guy. That part has been sitting with me. I've been going back and forth, questioning if maybe I was being unfair, if I've been expecting too much, or if she's just trying to manipulate the situation to her advantage. Eventually, I decided to share my story online, hoping to get some objective feedback. I posted on Reddit, asking if I was in the wrong for refusing to pay my half-siblings' college tuition, especially given that my estranged mother and stepfather are now struggling financially. As a side note, I also reached out to my uncle. He meant well, I know that, but I told him clearly that what he did wasn't okay. Sharing my life updates and contact information without asking me first put me in a difficult position. He apologized several times, explaining that he hadn't known about their financial issues and never imagined my mother would react the way she did. He acknowledged that it wasn't his place to share details about my life with my mother and admitted that if she and I were ever going to reconnect, it should have been on our own terms, not because he stepped in. Still, I know his intentions weren't malicious, so I don't plan to cut him off. If his motive had been anything else, I'd probably feel very differently. But he simply misjudged the situation. To be fair, he's also the reason I was able to go to college in the first place. He was the only one willing to co-sign my student loan when no one else stepped up. Without his help, I might not have made it this far at all. I did make sure to tell him that what he did wasn't okay, because while I appreciate everything he's done, I also have to protect my boundaries. I didn't want to sound ungrateful, but I also wasn't about to let it slide. I think I struck the right balance. Things between us are good, and I don't hold any resentment. If anything, his mistake gave me a much-needed opportunity to finally address all of this. I also spoke with my grandparents about everything that's happened recently. They told me they agree with how I handled the situation and even said they'd try to talk to my mom to help her see things more clearly. I understand that they've stayed in touch with her because they don't want to lose contact with their other grandchildren. That's a choice I respect. They see that her household is going through hard times, but they also know that it isn't right or fair for me to be dragged into it. That's where they stand, and I think it's a pretty reasonable take. First update. Since that last conversation nearly 9 days ago, my mom has taken it upon herself to start emailing me regularly. Every other day or so, she sends another message listing all the things she did for me while I was growing up, almost like she's trying to guilt me into feeling indebted. But raising me wasn't some special favor. She was my parent, and that responsibility came with the territory. I honestly don't see what she's trying to accomplish with these messages. She only took care of me when it suited her. The moment I became inconvenient, she and her husband made the decision to push me out, saying they needed to save money for the twins and focus on their future. Well, that future is here now. The twins are adults, and in my view, they should be responsible for themselves, instead of trying to drag me into their problems through guilt and manipulation. For a while, I was just ignoring her emails. But a few days ago, I finally decided to respond. I told her everything I had already laid out in my post. Predictably, she didn't take it well. She called me ungrateful again. I replied and told her that name-calling wouldn't change the reality of what happened, and that I didn't want to continue any relationship with her because, in truth, she hadn't been a good parent. After that, I blocked her email address, but she made a new one and kept trying to reach out, sending more messages. That's something she never did for me when I was the one left behind. I blocked the new address too, and I'll keep doing so if she continues. I'm not here to dwell on the past or chase something that was never there. Honestly, I'm relieved we're having this confrontation now. I think it's finally coming to an end, and I can get the closure I've needed for a long time. The only reason I let them into my home that day and spoke to them was because a small part of me still hoped they had changed. I hoped they had come to acknowledge what they'd done, or maybe even just say, congratulations. But talking to them made one thing very clear. They're not the kind of people who reflect on their actions. They don't feel remorse, and they don't understand the impact of their choices. After everything that's happened, I've completely let go of any hope of reconciliation. This most recent encounter just confirmed again how manipulative and self-serving they really are. Second update. I think what happened today was one of the strangest things my mother has ever done. She actually showed up at my workplace. Thankfully, I wasn't there. I'd taken the day off because I wasn't feeling well. Looking back, I'm incredibly relieved I stayed home. If I had been there, I have no doubt she would have caused a scene or done something to embarrass me. I only found out when the front desk called to let me know she had shown up, asking to see me and refusing to leave even after being told I wasn't in. The receptionist eventually handed her the phone, and I spoke to her directly. I was already nervous about what she might pull, but I stayed calm and firm. I told her I was at home and warned her that if she made any attempt to cause problems at my job, I wouldn't hesitate to take legal action. Serious action. I made it very clear that I would take her to court and that it could lead to consequences that would make her think twice about affording anything for her kids' education. I tried to sound as stern as possible, and I think it got through to her. She agreed to leave, but only if I promised to meet her in person. I reminded her she was in no position to be setting conditions. I also warned her that if she escalated things, my employer would take legal steps far less forgiving than anything I had considered. It would be in her best interest to walk away quietly. After that, the call ended, and I didn't receive any further updates, so I assume she left shortly after giving the phone back to the receptionist. Still, the whole situation was a close call, and I can't afford for anything like that to happen again. I've decided to consult an attorney to explore my options. She hasn't made any direct threats, so I'm not sure if I qualify for a restraining order yet, but I want to be prepared. Hopefully, this was unpleasant enough for her to finally back off for good. Update 3. At this point, I'm pretty confident we now have enough evidence to pursue a restraining order, so I probably won't need to keep debating whether to move forward. When my mother showed up at my workplace last week, I managed to talk her into leaving. But after what happened this week, I'm convinced that a restraining order isn't just a precaution, it's absolutely necessary. A few days ago, I came home from work and found her waiting outside my building. As soon as I saw her, I told her clearly that I didn't want a confrontation, and if she didn't leave, I'd be calling the police. I took out my phone to follow through, and that's when she suddenly rushed at me. She shoved me to the ground. and my phone flew out of my hand before I could hit dial. She started yelling, blaming me for everything that had gone wrong in her life, and then tried to physically attack me. For a few seconds, I was too shocked to even react. Her behavior was completely unhinged. Thankfully, I stay active and I'm a lot younger than she is, so I was able to restrain her without too much effort. By then, the commotion had drawn the attention of my neighbors. Several of them came outside, saw what was happening, and called the police while helping hold her back until officers arrived. When the authorities got there, I didn't hesitate. I pressed charges. I also spoke to my lawyer immediately and moved forward with requesting a restraining order. She crossed a line that can't be ignored. Since then, I've heard that Darren has taken the twins and moved into his parents' home. I don't know if he plans on returning, but apparently he confronted her after all of this happened. He called out her behavior and told her it couldn't continue. That led to an argument between them too. It sounds like things have completely unraveled for her. At this point, I think she's struggling to accept that I've built a stable life without her, and maybe that's why she's spiraling. But the truth is, whatever she's facing now, she brought on herself. I don't feel sorry for her, not anymore. The restraining order will be finalized soon, and with my income steadily growing, I've started thinking seriously about moving into a bigger place. Now feels like the right time to look into my options. Honestly, it's difficult knowing I'm connected by blood to someone who behaves like that. I do hope, for her own sake, that she eventually gets the help she clearly needs and learns how to live with some level of decency. Even my grandparents have told me they're keeping their distance now. She's treated them poorly too, and they've had enough. At this point, she only has herself to blame for the way people have pulled away from her. As for me, I'm no longer losing sleep over it. I'm finally moving forward.